The girl in the corner table part. One, the world before it broke. There is a sound you don't forget. Not a crash, not a scream. Something smaller than that, sharper. The kind of sound that only carries a few feet in a noisy room, but lands like a stone dropped into still water. You don't know why it stops you. You just know it does. The security cameras at Westbrook High School recorded 41,000 hours of footage during the 2019 to 2020 school year. Lunchtime, hallways, parking lots, the side entrance near the gym where kids sometimes slipped out early on Fridays. 41,000 hours of ordinary life in an ordinary school in Northern Virginia. 37 seconds of it ended up in a courtroom. This is the story of those 37 seconds. What led to them? What came after? And the 17-year-old girl who did not run when every instinct she had was telling her to. Her name was Wren Calloway. And you need to understand who she was before you can understand what she did. Westbrook High sat at the edge of a town that had once been farmland and was now the kind of suburb that looked identical from the highway, chain restaurants, a strip mall with a nail salon and a tax office subdivisions with names like Meadow Creek and Sycamore Ridge that hadn't seen a meadow or a sycamore in 30 years. The school itself was a flat-roofed building from the 1970s, expanded twice, never quite matching. The cafeteria was the original part. It smelled the way all cafeterias built in that era smell, and if you had eaten lunch in a school cafeteria anywhere in this country between 1965 and 1985, you would have recognized it without being able to name it. Something institutional, something warm in the wrong way. October 2019. The leaves were turning. The football team was undefeated through 6 games and the hallways knew it. Wren Calloway was a junior. 11 years old when her father died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in March, 2 weeks after her birthday, in a way that gave the family no time to prepare and left a silence in the house that her mother had worked 3 12-hour shifts a week for 6 years to fill with practical things, because practical things were the only language available to her for grief. 6 years of watching Carol Calloway leave for the hospital at 10 at night and come home at 7 in the mornings with the dark circles and a quiet that meant she was too tired to talk. 6 years of learning to be the kind of person who takes up as little space as possible, who keeps her head down, who figures things out alone because figuring things out alone is faster and does not require you to ask for help you are not sure is available. She was not invisible. That is an important distinction. Invisible means nobody sees you. Wren was seen. She was just filed away, quickly placed in the category that busy people use for those who do not demand attention. Quiet girl, smart enough, sits in the corner. And then people moved on to the next thing because there was always a next thing. What they missed, if they had looked longer, was this: Wren Calloway saw everything. She had been drawing since she was 8 years old. Not the kind of drawing that children do, houses with smoke coming out of chimneys, suns in the upper corner of the page. Wren drew faces. She drew the way a person's jaw tightens when they are trying not to cry, the way eyes shift slightly to the left when someone is deciding how much of the truth to tell. She drew the cafeteria from memory on the back of her history notes and got every table in the right position, every window, every water stain on the ceiling, tiles above the drink station. Her sketchbook was a composition notebook she had covered in brown paper, the kind of thing that looked like a school assignment from the outside. She kept it with her at all times. It was not a diary. It held no words, only faces and hands and the small, honest moments that people perform when they think no one is watching. She was always watching. She bought the pale blue sweater at a thrift store on Route 7 in late September with money she had set aside from babysitting the Fleming kids on Saturday afternoons. It was cashmere or something close to it, soft in a way that felt like an apology for the rest of the week. She wore it on days when she needed to feel like herself. That was the word she used in her own mind, though she had never said it to anyone. This is the sweater I wear when I need to feel like myself. She was wearing it on the day everything changed. The cafeteria at Westbrook High operated on a simple and ancient social physics. The tables near the windows, flooded with afternoon light, belonged to the seniors who had claimed them freshman year and defended them ever since through nothing more than habit and expectation. The round tables near the back belonged to the junior and sophomore clusters that formed and reformed throughout the year, alliances built on shared classes and lunch periods, and the slow, complicated business of figuring out who you were and who you were willing to sit next to while you did it. The corner table of the one closest to the door to the parking lot, half in shadow because the overhead light on that side had been flickering for 3 weeks, and no one had fixed it, that was Wren's. Not officially. Nobody had assigned it to her. She had simply arrived there early in freshman year, found it empty, and kept arriving. It had become hers the way a park bench becomes yours if you sit on it every day for 2 years. An understanding reached without words. She liked it for practical reasons. Back to the wall, clear sightline to the entire room. Close enough to the exit that she could leave without navigating through the crowd. But she also liked it because of what it gave her as a drawer. From that corner, she could see the whole cafeteria like a theater. She could study the way a sophomore girl laughed too hard at something a boy said, and then looked immediately sideways to check if the right people had noticed. The way the lunch aide, Mrs. Peterson, rubbed the back of her neck every day at 12:15 like clockwork, some old injury that always announced itself right on schedule. She was drawing the public library on Center Street on the day it happened. Not the school library, the public library where she spent Saturday mornings when she wasn't babysitting, in the reading room on the second floor with its wide windows and the smell of old paper and the particular quality of morning light that she had been trying to capture on the page for 3 weeks without quite getting it right. She was working on the arch above the entrance, the way the stone changed color halfway up the columns, where someone had pressure washed half of it and then stopped. She did not notice Declan Pruitt cross the cafeteria toward her. She rarely noticed Declan Pruitt by design. You learned quickly at Westbrook High that the safest relationship you could have with Declan Pruitt was no relationship at all. Not hostility, not friendship. Absence. You simply did not exist in his field of vision, and in return, he did not exist in yours. This arrangement had worked for 2.5 years. Declan Pruitt was 18 years old and the starting wide receiver on a football team that the local paper had called the best in the district in a decade. He was tall in the way that some boys become tall early, not gracefully, but as a statement. He had the kind of face that photographed well and charmed adults on first meeting, the kind of face that coaches and teachers and school board members looked at and saw a young man going somewhere. His father was Frank Pruitt. If you lived in this part of Northern Virginia and had anything to do with Westbrook High School, you knew the name Frank Pruitt. Not because he was the loudest person in the room, he rarely was, but because his name was on things. The new scoreboard in the gym, the weight room renovation completed the previous spring, the annual golf fundraiser that brought in more money for the athletic department than the school district allocated in a given year. Frank Pruitt's name was on a brass plaque by the gym entrance, and it had been there since Declan was in 8th grade. Frank Pruitt sat on the school board. He had for 6 years. He was not the chairman. He did not need to be. Chairman gave speeches. Frank Pruitt made calls. Declan understood his position the way children of powerful parents often do not, through any explicit instruction, but through observation. He had watched his father make problems disappear. He had watched people in positions of authority defer to Frank Pruitt in ways that had nothing to do with his official title. He had internalized at a cellular level that certain rules were written for other people. He had a group of 4 or 5 boys who moved with him through the school day, an orbit of loyalty maintained through a combination of genuine friendship and something less comfortable that nobody named directly. Owen Briggs was one of them. Owen had been one of them since sophomore year, and if you looked closely enough, which most people didn't, Owen's place in that group had a different quality than the others. The others laughed freely. Owen watched Declan's face before he laughed, calibrating. There was a half-second delay that spoke to something, but nobody was looking closely enough to read it. The cafeteria on the 3rd Tuesday of October was running at its usual noise level. Someone had dropped a tray near the drink station, and the whole room had erupted in the obligatory cheer that cafeterias have produced since the beginning of institutional dining. The football table was loud and central, replaying Friday's game with a volume that suggested they believed the story improved with each retelling. Wren's pencil moved across the page. She was working on the shadow under the library's arch, trying to get the depth right. She had a half-eaten sandwich in front of her, peanut butter on wheat, the same thing she had brought every Tuesday for 3 years because it was cheap and she liked it, and she had been alternating between bites and strokes of the pencil with the comfortable rhythm of someone who has made a private peace with solitude. She did not see Declan catch Owen's eye across the table. She did not see the small upward motion of his chin, the signal. She did not see Owen look down quickly the way you look down when you have been asked to be part of something you already know you will regret. She did not see Declan push back from his table and begin crossing the cafeteria toward her corner, moving through the crowd with the casual ease of someone who has never had to excuse himself to get where he's going. She was looking at the arch. The sound when it came was small, a sharp snap, the kind that comes from elastic under tension, release suddenly hitting skin. A half second of pressure at her back there and gone. The pencil skipped across the page, leaving a line that ruined 4 days of careful shadow work. Her sandwich fell. It landed face down on the floor, peanut butter side down. She would remember that detail later with a strange clarity, the way you remember the smallest things from the moments that rearrange your life. She did not understand what had happened for 2 full seconds. That is how shock works, not as a dramatic thing, but as a gap. A moment where the brain refuses to process what the body already knows. Then the laughter came. Not the whole cafeteria, maybe 8 or 9 people at the nearest tables. But laughter has a way of carrying in a large room. It has a direction. And the direction of that laughter was unmistakably her. She heard his voice behind her. Relaxed, amused the way someone is amused by a joke they have told several times and know lands well. Lighten up, Calloway, it's just a joke. She turned. She should not have turned. She knew even as she was doing it that turning was the wrong thing. But the body does what the body does in the moment before the mind catches up. Declan Pruitt stood behind her chair 3 feet away, hands in his pockets. Now the evidence of what he had done absorbed back into his casual posture. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite indifference, something in between. The expression of a person who has just demonstrated something about the world to someone who didn't know it yet. She looked at him. She looked at the tables around her, at the faces half turned toward her, recalibrating between laughter and the detached curiosity of people who have identified that something is happening and are deciding whether to be part of it or pretend they haven't noticed. She looked at her sandwich on the floor. She picked up her sketchbook. She picked up her pencil. She put them in her bag. She stood up from the table and walked to the door and pushed through it and kept walking. She did not run. Running meant something. Walking was just walking. The hallway outside was empty. The girls' bathroom was 40 feet down around the corner. She went in, went to the last stall, locked the door. She did not cry immediately. She stood there with her back against the cold metal of the stall partition. She looked at her hands. There is a specific kind of humiliation that comes from being made into a spectacle in a room full of people in a way that was designed to make spectacle of you in a way that was entirely private and entirely public at the same time. It leaves a mark that has no name. Not exactly shame because you did nothing shameful. Not exactly anger because anger requires a belief that you had some power to protect, and that belief was not available at that moment. Something between those things. Something that finds the soft places and presses. She turned on the faucet and ran cold water over her wrist, not for any dramatic reason, just because it was cold and she needed something real. She stood at that sink for 4 minutes. She dried her hands. She looked at herself in the mirror, the pale blue sweater, the face she had always considered unremarkable, the eyes that she had spent years training to observe other people, and that now looked back at her with an expression she could not quite read even with all her practice. She went back to class. She sat in her seat. She took notes. She did not tell anyone. What Ren Calloway did not know, could not have known, was that the cafeteria at Westbrook High had 14 security cameras mounted at ceiling level. The technology was not sophisticated. The resolution was adequate rather than excellent. The angle sometimes awkward. The timestamp occasionally running 30 seconds behind. But cameras do not require sophistication to do their most essential work. They require only one thing to be there. Camera 4 covered the southeast corner of the cafeteria, the corner with the flickering light. The corner with the table that belonged unofficially and by years of quiet habit to a junior girl with a sketchbook and a pale blue sweater. Camera 4 had been there all along. Kenneth Decker had worked security at Westbrook High for 11 years. He was 58 years old and a former sheriff's deputy who had left that work after 20 years for reasons he described to people as health and did not describe further. He was not a tall man, not an imposing man, but he had the kind of stillness that comes from having spent decades in rooms where something might happen and being the person responsible for knowing it before it did. He wore his uniform like it was just clothes, which is the mark of someone who has worn a uniform long enough to stop performing it. His desk was in a room about the size of a large closet off the main office. He had a monitor array showing the live feeds from all 14 cameras and a storage system that kept 72 hours of rolling footage before it began overwriting. He reviewed footage selectively when something was reported or when something on the live feed caught his eye. On the evening of October 15, 2019, Decker stayed late to review footage from a scuffle near the gym entrance that had been reported to him that afternoon. 2 boys, a misunderstanding about a locker brief, physical contact, quickly broken up. He needed the timestamp to complete his incident report for Principal Hargrove. He found the gym footage. He logged what he needed. He was about to close the window when something made him pause. He could not have told you exactly what it was. 11 years of watching monitors teaches you things that you cannot fully articulate. A pattern, a shape at the edge of attention. He scrolled back through the cafeteria feed from earlier that day, not quite sure what he was looking for. He found it at 12:23. He watched it once. Then he leaned forward and watched it again. The approach from behind, the deliberate path across the cafeteria, the way Declan Pruitt positioned himself, the snap, the sandwich on the floor, the laughter from the surrounding tables, the girl standing up and walking out with the careful, controlled stride of someone using every resource she had to hold herself together. Decker sat with this for a moment. He had seen students do cruel things in 11 years. Cruelty among teenagers was not a new category for him, but there was something in the deliberateness of this that held his attention. The path across the cafeteria had been specific. The approach from behind had been specific. Declan Pruitt had known exactly what he was doing and had gone across the room to do it. Decker opened the archive. He pulled footage from the previous semester, February, March, April. He found the first one in 12 minutes. A different girl. Same approach from behind, same cafeteria. The girl had flinched forward hard enough to knock her water bottle off the table. She had not walked out, she had gone still instead, which is sometimes harder to watch. Laughter from the same general area of the room. Declan Pruitt back at his table in under a minute, as if he had simply stood up to stretch. Decker checked the student directory. That girl had enrolled mid-January and transferred out in late March. He pulled February footage. Second girl. This one in the hallway near the gym, not the cafeteria, but the geometry was identical. The approach from behind the blind side, the movement quick enough that you could write it off as an accident if you wanted to write it off as an accident. This girl had left at the end of February, family relocation according to the official record. He sat back in his chair. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know the feeling of a pattern emerging and to know that the feeling required verification before action. He pulled the third clip from the fall of the previous year. There it was. A girl he didn't immediately recognize, a sophomore, based on the class ring she was wearing. Same geometry, same approach. The girl had gasped loud enough that a student 2 seats away had turned to look. She had gathered her things and left the cafeteria, and Decker tracked her on the hallway cameras all the way to the front office, where she had sat in a chair for 20 minutes before apparently being told that whoever she had come to see was unavailable and going back to class. He found no record of any complaint being filed that day. He checked enrollment. The girl had withdrawn in December. Parents cited personal reasons. Declan Pruitt, 3 times in 14 months. 3 different girls, 3 exits from the school. And today, a 4th. Decker sat in that small room with the hum of the monitor array for a long time. He was not prone to sentimentality and did not indulge in it, but there are things that get past even the most practiced defenses. He thought about his niece Clara, who had attended a school 3 counties east of here and who had been 16 years old when she stopped attending any school at all. He did not think about this directly. He just sat with the weight of it, the way you sit with weight you have been carrying long enough that you have stopped noticing it until something makes you notice again. Then he saved all 4 clips to a separate drive. He wrote the timestamps in a notepad in his desk drawer. He looked at the clock. It was after 8 in the evening. He would see Principal Hargrove first thing in the morning. Wren Calloway ate dinner alone that night. Her mother had left for her shift at 7, a kiss on the top of her head, and a Tupperware container of leftover pasta on the counter. Wren heated it in the microwave, ate standing at the kitchen counter, and then went to her room. She took out her sketchbook. The line from the skip pencil was still there, cutting across the shadow under the library arch in a way that ruined the composition. She looked at it for a while, then she turned to a new page. She sat with the blank page longer than usual. She was trying to find something to draw and finding instead the image she could not get rid of Declan Pruitt's face when she had turned to look at him. That expression. Not quite a smile, not quite anything. The expression of a person who has demonstrated something. She did not draw his face. She would not give it space on the page. She drew her own hands instead. She drew them exactly as they had looked when she stood at the bathroom sink. Fingers slightly spread, water running over the wrists, the pale blue sweater cuffs pushed back. She drew them small and precise and took her time getting the knuckles right. Then she closed the sketchbook and went to bed. She lay in the dark for an hour and thought about what she should have said and knew that she wouldn't have been able to say it even if she'd known what it was. That's the thing nobody tells you about moments like that. Not the movies, not the stories where the protagonist finds the perfect words at exactly the right time. The thing nobody tells you is that the words don't come in the moment. The moment is too loud for words. The words come later, in the dark, when it is too late for them to do anything. She closed her eyes. Across town, in a small room off the main office of Westbrook High School, the monitor array hummed in the dark. The cameras watched the empty cafeteria, the empty hallways, the empty parking lot where two cars sat under yellow light. Camera 4 held its angle on the corner table where the overhead light flickered against nothing. The sandwich was gone. The custodians had cleared it along with everything else. The table looked the same as it always had, but the footage from 12:23 that afternoon sat on a separate drive in Kenneth Decker's desk drawer. And Decker was not the kind of man who put things in a drawer and left them there. The morning came the way October mornings come in Northern Virginia, a gray light that suggested cold. Without committing to it, the trees on the edge of the parking lot already losing their color at the tips. Wren dressed carefully. She chose a different sweater gray, something she could disappear into. She ate a piece of toast over the sink and left before she had to think about it too much. She was at her corner table by 11:45, 12 minutes before the first wave of students arrived. She had her sketchbook open to a clean page. She had her sandwich the same as always. She had already decided that morning, standing at the bathroom mirror, that she would not change her table. Changing her table would mean that something had changed. She was not going to let something change. She was going to sit in her corner and draw and not think about yesterday. She was drawing the cafeteria itself, the angle of the windows, the grid of ceiling tiles, the way the light came in and fell differently at noon than at morning, when she became aware that the quality of the noise in the room had shifted slightly. Not louder, just different. The directional thing that told you without telling you where something was happening. She did not look up. Declan Pruitt was at the center table. He was telling a story that required his hands. His group was laughing. Owen Briggs sat to his left, slightly apart in the way that looked like proximity, but wasn't quite. Owen was laughing. Owen's laugh stopped a half second after everyone else's, like an echo arriving late. Ms. Linda Tanner stood near the door to the serving area. She was a history teacher with 17 years at Westbrook, a woman who genuinely liked her students and was known for the kind of fairness that teenagers respect without always being able to name. She had a coffee mug in one hand and was looking at her phone with the distracted attention of someone checking email and only partially succeeding. She was approximately 10 steps from Wren's corner table. She had been standing there for 4 minutes. She had been there in that spot yesterday, at 12:23. She had been there when it happened. She had looked up from her phone for a moment. Decker would confirm this later when he went back and reviewed the footage from the adjacent camera angle. A brief uplift of the head, the kind of movement that means you registered something. Then the head went back down. The phone went back up. The mug went to her lips. She had been 10 steps away. Wren's pencil moved across the page. She did not know about Linda Tanner yet. She did not know about the 3 other girls yet. She did not know about Kenneth Decker's desk drawer or the drive or the timestamps written in careful print in a notepad. She did not know that 11 years of watching security monitors had trained a man to recognize a pattern across a span of 14 months. She knew only what she always knew: the angle of the light, the hum of the room, the clean white page in front of her. She knew the sound the pencil made when it moved exactly where she needed it to go home. She knew that she was wearing the gray sweater and that her pale blue one was folded on her bed at home, and that she did not yet know when she would want to wear it again. She knew she had not run. She had walked, and she had come back. That for now was the only thing she was sure of. The cafeteria noise rose and fell around her like water. Somewhere across the room, Declan Pruitt laughed at something loud and unworried. The sound traveled. It always did. Wren's pencil kept moving. The camera in the corner watched them both. That afternoon, after the last bell, Kenneth Decker walked to the main office and knocked on the open door of Principal Hargrove's office. He had the drive in his jacket pocket. He had the notepad. He placed his completed incident report for the gym scuffle on the desk first, because he had learned long ago that the order in which you present things matters. "There's something else," he said. Hargrove looked up from his computer. He was a man in his late 50s, a career administrator who had been at Westbrook for 9 years, and who ran the school with the competent, slightly exhausted efficiency of someone who has seen enough to no longer be surprised by much. "I was reviewing cafeteria footage last night," Decker said. He plugged the drive into the port on Hargrove's computer. "I need you to watch something." He brought up the first clip, 12:23, October 15th, the southeast corner, Declan Pruitt crossing the cafeteria, the approach, The snap, the sandwich on the floor. Wren Calloway walking out with her bag over her shoulder and her back straight and her steps exactly carefully measured. Hargrove watched without speaking. "Now watch this one," Decker said. He brought up the February clip, then the March clip, then the one from the fall of the year before. The room was quiet when he finished. The monitor on Hargrove's desk showed the paused image of a cafeteria in October frozen at 12:24 and 11 seconds the moment after Wren had already gone. Hargrove looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he said, "We need to talk to the girl." "Yes," Decker said, "we do." He did not say the other thing he was thinking yet. That was a conversation for later. For now, this was enough. The drive sat between them on the desk. 14 months of a pattern compressed into 4 clips waiting. Outside the window, the parking lot was emptying. Cars pulling out one by one, students heading home, the ordinary dispersal of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at a school in Northern Virginia. Somewhere in that building, a girl with a sketchbook was walking to her locker. She did not know yet that tomorrow morning she would be called to the principal's office. She did not know that a man she barely recognized, the security officer who nodded at her sometimes in the hallway, had spent the previous evening finding her in 14 months of security footage and putting what he found in a drawer to keep it safe. She did not know any of it, but the camera had been there all along. And so had she. Part 2. The cost of standing still. The next morning came in quietly. Wren was at her locker at 7:40 when the office aide found her. A girl she barely knew, a freshman with a lanyard full of hall passes and the careful expression of someone executing an official errand. She handed Wren a folded note without ceremony and walked back the way she came. Wren unfolded it. "Please come to the main office at your earliest convenience. Principal Hargrove." She read it twice. Her first thought, which arrived before she could stop it, was that she had done something wrong. This is the conditioning of years. When you are the kind of person who keeps her head down and takes up as little space as possible, the instinct runs deep. If authority wants to see you, it is because you have failed to be small enough. She folded the note and put it in her jacket pocket. She closed her locker. She walked to the main office with the careful, measured strides she had used walking out of the cafeteria 2 days earlier. The office smelled like coffee and copy paper. The administrative assistant behind the front desk told her to go straight in. Hargrove was behind his desk. Decker was standing to the left of the door, which surprised her. She did not know why the security officer would be in a meeting with the principal. She filed this away and sat down. "We asked you to come in because we need to talk about something that happened in the cafeteria on Tuesday," Hargrove said. His voice had the calibrated gentleness of someone who has been briefed on how to begin a difficult conversation. "We want to hear your account of it." She felt the familiar reflex activate, the instinct to minimize, to say it was nothing, to perform the small social act of making something that happened to her more comfortable for the people they asking about it. She opened her mouth. Decker spoke before she could. "You didn't do anything wrong." His voice was not gentle in the way Hargrove's was. It was flat and direct, the way a person speaks when they mean a thing completely and have no interest in decorating it. "I want to be clear about that before anything else. Whatever happened in there, it wasn't something you caused." She closed her mouth. She looked at him. He was looking at her steadily, with the full, unhurried attention of someone who has spent enough years watching things that they have stopped needing to perform engagement. He was simply there, present, saying a thing he meant. Something in her chest, some tension, that had been sitting there for 2 days without a name, moved slightly. "We saw it on the cameras," Hargrove said. "We have the footage." She nodded slowly. She had not known there were cameras in that corner. She thought about this for a moment, what it meant that a machine had been watching when everyone in the room had chosen not to. She told them what had happened. She did not embellish it. She did not minimize it. She said it in the plain language of someone describing a thing that occurred in sequence, start to finish. The sandwich, the soon, the laughter, his voice, the walk to the bathroom, the cold water on her wrists. When she finished, the office was quiet. "Would you be willing to make a formal statement?" Hargrove asked. She thought about what formal statement meant. It meant written down. It meant existing somewhere outside her own memory in a file attached to her name and attached to his. It meant real in a way that could not be taken back. "Yes," she said. She said it before she had fully decided, but she heard herself say it, and she did not correct it. Declan Pruitt was called to the office at 10:15. He walked in with the unhurried ease of someone who has been called to the principal's office enough times to know it rarely goes badly for him. He sat down with his jacket still on and looked at Hargrove with an expression that said he was prepared to be reasonable about whatever minor administrative matter this turned out to be. Hargrove showed him the footage. Decker watched Declan's face during the playback. He had developed over 11 years, and the career before that, a specific skill in this area. The face during footage playback is one of the most honest things you will ever see. The gap between the face a person has prepared and the face that responds involuntarily to seeing themselves is a gap that tells you nearly everything you need to know. Declan's face went through three distinct phases. The first was continued ease, the assumption that what he was about to see would be manageable. The second, which arrived at the moment of the snap and lasted perhaps 4 seconds, was something more careful, a recalibration. And the third, which settled in as the clip ended, was the expression of someone running calculations. "That's not what it looks like," Declan said. "Tell me what it looks like," Decker said. "It was a joke. She's a junior. I know her from the hall. It wasn't meant to be a big deal." Hargrove leaned forward. "Declan, we have 3 other clips." The calculation in Declan's face shifted. Not much, but enough. Decker watched him decide in real time that this required his father. The meeting ended shortly after. Declan was asked to wait in an outer office. He sat down in the chair by the administrative assistant's desk and took out his phone. His father arrived 22 minutes later. Frank Pruitt was 54 years old and had the composed, deliberate energy of a man who has spent 30 years learning that the most effective power is the kind that does not need to announce itself. He was not loud. He did not come in demanding. He came in the way that certain men come into rooms with a settled weight, as if the room had been slightly off balance before he arrived and had now corrected itself. He shook Hargrove's hand. He did not shake Decker's. He listened to a brief summary of the situation. He watched the main clip, once his face giving away nothing that Decker could read. Then he said, "I'd like a moment alone with the principal." Decker looked at Hargrove. Hargrove looked at Decker. "Of course," Hargrove said. Decker walked out. He stood in the hallway outside the closed office door and looked at the ceiling and thought about 11 years and the 3 girls who had transferred out and the notepad in his desk drawer. Through the door, he could hear nothing. Frank Pruitt was not the kind of man who raised his voice. When the door opened 12 minutes later and Frank Pruitt walked past him without acknowledgement, Decker went back into the office and sat down across from Hargrove. Hargrove had a pen in his hand that he was not using. He set it down. "We have to follow procedure," he said. "We bring in the student, take the statement, notify the parents, and refer to the district if warranted." "And the other 3 girls," Decker said. Hargrove looked at him. "2 of those incidents predate my time reviewing this footage systematically," Decker said. "But they're there. You've seen them." "We document what we can confirm," Hargrove said. He chose his words with a care that had not been there 20 minutes ago. "This is a complex situation with multiple dimensions to consider." Decker listened to the phrase multiple dimensions. He said it next to complex situation. He nodded once and said nothing more. He went back to his office. He put his hand on the notepad in the drawer and left it there for a moment, then closed the drawer. He was a security officer, not a police officer. There were things he could do and things he could not do, and the border between them was not always where he wanted it to be. He made a call to the county sheriff's non-emergency line. He explained what he had found and was asked to submit the footage through the district's standard protocol. He said he would. He did not say that he had been in this building long enough to know what standard protocol tended to produce when a man like Frank Pruitt was on the other side of it. He submitted the footage through the proper channel. Then he made a second call to a detective he had known for years from his time in the department and told him everything, all of it, start to finish. Wren went to her afternoon classes. She sat in her seats and took her notes and said the right things when called on. She had become very good over the years at performing the surface of a normal day, while other things were happening underneath it. During 6th period, her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. An Instagram message from an account she did not recognize. The username was a string of letters and numbers. The message was 5 words. "I want to tell the truth." She looked at it for a long time. After class, she found a quiet corner near the gym exit and typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came in under a minute. "Owen. Briggs, please don't say anything to anyone yet. Can we talk after school?" Not here. She stood with the phone in her hand. She thought about Owen Briggs, who had been standing to Declan's left in the cafeteria on Tuesday. She tried to reconstruct his face from that moment and found she could. She had trained herself to remember faces. His expression had been the one she had filed as echo arriving late, the laughter that came a half second after everyone else's. She typed parking lot, east side, 3:30. He was already there when she arrived, standing near the far end of the lot away from the main flow of students leaving. He had his backpack over one shoulder and his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked standing there without his group around him, like a person she had never actually seen before, which she realized was essentially true. She had only ever seen Owen Briggs inside the orbit of Declan Pruitt, where everyone in that orbit took on some quality of the center. Standing alone, he looked smaller, younger. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for long enough that it had started to change the shape of how he stood. "Thank you for coming," he said. "What did you want to tell me?" He looked at the pavement for a moment, then at her. "What happened to you in the cafeteria?" "I was there. I knew it was going to happen before it happened." He stopped. "I want you to know that I'm sorry. I know that probably doesn't mean anything." She waited. She had the distinct sense that there was more, and that rushing toward it would stop it from coming. "I've been with that group since sophomore year," Owen said. "Declan and I used to actually be friends. Freshman year, real friends, not like the thing it turned into." He stopped again. "The summer before sophomore year, we went to his family's place on the lake for a weekend. There were some pictures. I was doing something stupid, nothing serious, but the kind of thing that gets passed around and people make into a bigger deal than it was." He exhaled slowly. He kept them. Ren said nothing. He brought it up for the first time in October of sophomore year. "We were in the locker room after practice, and he just mentioned it offhand like it was a casual thing. Said he'd held on to them. Said he was sure nothing would come of it." Owen looked at his hands. "But I understood what he meant. I understood exactly what he meant. And after that, I was there. I showed up where he showed up. I laughed when he laughed. I didn't ask what we were about to do before we did it, because asking meant thinking about it, and thinking about it meant knowing what I was." The parking lot was quieting around them. A group of freshmen cut across the far end, not looking in their direction. "He didn't pick you randomly," Owen said. "He watched people. He looked for people who he thought wouldn't push back, who he thought would just absorb it and move on." He paused. "He was wrong about you." Ren looked at him steadily. "How many other people has he done this to, the controlling thing, not just the cafeteria thing?" Owen thought about it with the careful expression of someone counting. "That I know about directly 3, 4 including me." He looked at her. "But I think there are others I don't know about." She nodded slowly. "Would you be willing to say that to someone official?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought the answer was going to be no, long enough that she started to understand what it would cost him if the answer was yes. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "I think I have to be." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the half-second delay in his laughter, the echo arriving late. "Okay," she said. She walked home the long way through the neighborhood with the big oaks that still had most of their leaves, thinking about patterns and what it meant to see them only after they had been happening for a long time right in front of you. 4 days after Wren gave her formal statement, a detective from the county sheriff's office came to Westbrook High and reviewed the footage himself. He was methodical and said little. He asked for copies of all 4 clips which Decker provided. He asked for the enrollment records of the 3 previous girls, which Hargrove provided after a call to the district office. 2 days after that, Declan Pruitt was formally suspended pending investigation. The suspension happened on a Thursday. By Friday morning, Wren knew it had happened because the cafeteria felt different when she walked in. Not quieter exactly, more deliberate in its noise, the way a room is deliberate when it is consciously performing normalcy over something that has disrupted it. She walked past the center tables. She kept walking. She passed the corner table with the flickering light overhead. She sat down at a table in the middle of the cafeteria. She was not sure afterward what had made her do it. It had not been a decision in the way she usually made decisions, with consideration and internal debate. It had just been the next step her feet took, as if something had shifted in the geometry of the room, and the map she had been using for 2.5 years was no longer accurate. She opened her sketchbook. She did not draw the library. She did not draw the cafeteria or the ceiling tiles or anyone's face. She drew a hand open, palm up. Just a hand. She spent 20 minutes on it, getting the lines of the palm right the way the fingers curve naturally when a hand is at rest, not performing anything. A hand that is simply itself. When she looked up, she noticed that 2 people at the nearest table had glanced at her sketchbook while pretending not to. She looked back down and kept drawing. It was the first time she had drawn in the cafeteria without the specific sensation of smallness. Not invisible, not loud, just present, taking up the space she actually occupied, no more, no less. Her phone began receiving messages Friday evening. The first few were from numbers she didn't recognize, which was unusual because she had a small social circle, and her number was not widely distributed. Short messages. The kind that don't need to be understood in context because their purpose is not communication, but impact. She read the first three and put the phone face down on her desk. She picked it up again an hour later and found 37 more. Her number had been posted somewhere public. She turned the phone off and set it on her nightstand and sat at her desk with her sketchbook open to a blank page and did not draw anything for a long time. By Saturday morning, there was a thread on a platform she used occasionally organized by a username she did not recognize, but which she suspected from the phrasing and the specific details it included. The thread was about her. It called her calculating. It called her attention-seeking. It included a photo of her she did not remember being taken from the side in the cafeteria, which meant it had been taken recently, and without her knowledge by someone who had been watching her the way she usually watched other people. She read the thread once. She closed the app. She went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the counter looking at the backyard. And the maple tree by the fence had gone almost fully red. She looked at it for a while. She called her mother at the hospital. Her mother picked up on the third ring. "I need to tell you something," Ren said. "I should have told you earlier. I'm sorry I didn't." She told her everything, starting from the cafeteria and going forward in order. The formal statement, the suspension, the parking lot conversation with Owen, the thread. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was something she was good at, a skill developed from years of receiving difficult information from patients and families, and learning that interruption, however well-intentioned, closes a door. When Ren finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "I'll be home in 3 hours," her mother said. "Don't open the phone again until I'm there." A pause. "Ren, you did the right thing, both things, telling them and telling me." Ren held the phone against her ear after the call ended. Outside, the red maple held its color in the gray October morning. She looked at it until she felt steady enough to put the phone down. Her mother's name was Carol Calloway. She was 47 years old and had been a registered nurse for 22 years, the last 14 of them in the ICU of a regional hospital. 22 years in that environment teaches you something that cannot be learned any other way. The difference between the things that matter right now and the things that only feel like they do. Carol had learned to tell them apart before she finished her first year on the floor, and she had not confused them since. She came home at noon, still in her jacket, and sat with Ren at the kitchen table and asked her to go through it again from the beginning. Then she called the county sheriff's office and asked to speak with the detective. She was on hold for 11 minutes and then spoke with him for 9. She took notes on the back of an envelope she found in the junk drawer. Then she called the school and was told that Principal Hargrove was unavailable on weekends. She left a message. On Monday morning, she drove to the school and walked into the main office before the first bell and asked to see Principal Hargrove directly. She sat in the outer office for 25 minutes with the patience of someone who has spent years waiting in rooms where urgency has to be expressed through stillness rather than action. Hargrove came out to greet her. He let her in. He sat across from her. He arranged his face into the calibrated gentleness that Ren had come to recognize and began to speak about the situation and the complexity of the circumstances and the importance of making sure all parties were treated fairly through what he called the process. Carol listened. She nodded at appropriate intervals. She asked questions that were specific and required specific answers, which Hargrove provided with increasing amounts of qualification attached to each one. Halfway through this conversation, Hargrove's desk phone rang. He apologized and asked if she would excuse him for just one moment. He picked up the receiver and turned slightly toward the window, lowering his voice. Carol Calloway had spent 22 years learning to process information in rooms full of competing noise. She had learned to filter to identify the signal inside the ambient sound, to extract what mattered from what was simply present. She had not intended to listen to his phone call. She had simply not been given a reason not to. She heard the name Pruitt. She heard the word statement. She heard the phrase, "We can manage this," without it needing to go further. Her hand moved to her jacket pocket where her phone was. She did not deliberate about this. There was no internal debate. Some decisions arrive already made, and you simply discover that you have made them. She pressed record. She set the phone in her lap face down and sat with the patient stillness of someone who has learned to be very still in rooms where everything depends on what happens next. The call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. When Hargrove hung up and turned back toward her, his expression was arranged. Carol's was too. They looked at each other across the desk. "I understand this is difficult for your family," Hargrove said. "It is," Carol said. I appreciate your time. She picked up her jacket. She put it on. She said goodbye to the administrative assistant on the way out and walked to her car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. She looked at her phone. She played the last 90 seconds of the recording back through the phone's speaker quietly in the car. Then she made a call. The detective did not answer. She left a voicemail that was 4 sentences long and included the phrase, "I have audio that I think you need to hear." She started the car. She had to be back at the hospital by 3. She had a daughter at home and a phone recording of 4 minutes and 32 seconds and someone who would know what to do with it. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove. The days that followed had the quality of a period when something has been set in motion and is moving unseen, and all you can do is go about your ordinary life and know that it is moving. Wren went to school. She sat at the middle table in the cafeteria, which had by now become her table, in the unremarked way that tables become yours. She drew. She went to class. She checked her phone selectively, applying a simple filter: people she knew, yes. Everything else, no. One evening, she got a text from a number she had saved. "Owen Briggs, I talked to my parents. I'm going to give a statement." She sat with this for a moment. She thought about the parking lot and the late laughter and the weight that had been changing the shape of how he stood. She typed back, "Okay." She did not add anything to that. It was enough. On a Wednesday evening, 11 days after the cafeteria, her mother came home from her shift and told Wren that the detective had called that afternoon. He had listened to the recording. He was referring the case to the county district attorney's office. There would be a formal proceeding. Both Wren and Carol would receive subpoenas in the next week. Carol said it plainly because that was how she said things. Wren sat across from her at the kitchen table. The overhead light made everything look slightly more yellow than it was. Outside, the maple tree was past its peak, now the red thinning to reveal the gray branches underneath. "It's going to be harder before it's easier," her mother said. "I know. Whatever happens in that room, you will have done the right thing." Wren looked at her mother. She thought about the ICU and the 12-hour shifts and the 12 years since her father and the way Carol had learned to say what needed to be said and then get up and do the next thing. "I know," Wren said again. She went to her room. She opened her sketchbook to a new page. She sat for a while with the pencil in her hand, not drawing, just sitting. She reached up and took down the pale blue sweater from her shelf. She held it for a moment, the soft fabric, the color that looked like a certain quality, a winter sky, the weight of a thing you bought because it made you feel like yourself. She folded it neatly and set it on top of the shelf instead of inside it. Then she picked up the pencil. She drew a door. Just a door, plain and rectangular, slightly ajar. The kind of door that could open into anything. She looked at it for a while. Then she went to sleep. Kenneth Decker received a call at 8:47 on a Thursday evening. The number was one he had in his phone but had not spoken to in months. Ms. Linda Tanner. He had been thinking about that call, the possibility of it, since the night he had reviewed the footage and found her in the adjacent camera angle 10 steps away, looking up for a moment and then looking back down. He answered. She spoke without preamble, the way people speak when they have been rehearsing what they are about to say long enough that they need to get it out before it leaves them. "I was standing there, Decker. I was right there. I saw what he did, and I saw her face, and I looked back at my phone." A pause. A long one. "Oh, I'm up. I wait, no. I know what you're going to say." "I'm not going to say anything," he said. "I know why I did it. I'm not going to pretend I don't know. Frank Pruitt went to bat for me when I had a complaint filed against me in 2017, and it should have ended my career at that school, and it didn't because of him. And I have been ever since then." She stopped. "I have been his in a way I didn't let myself call by its name." Decker sat in his kitchen with the phone against his ear. The overhead light was on. He had been reading. The book was still open in his other hand. "What are you going to do?" he said. "I've been asking myself that for 11 days. A pause. "I have emails between me and Frank Pruitt from the 2017 situation and after. They would show a pattern that goes beyond me." She breathed in. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to use them." "That's not a question I can answer for you." "No." Quiet. "I know it isn't." They sat in silence on the phone for a moment. "Whatever you decide," he said, "you'll have to live in it. Make sure it's a thing you can live in." She was quiet for a long moment after that. Then, "Okay." The call ended. Decker set the phone on the table. He looked at the street light through the window for a long time. He thought about Clara's face in its frame on his desk at work. He thought about the girl in the pale blue sweater who had walked back into the cafeteria and sat at a different table and drawn a hand open palm up simply itself. He thought about the three girls who had packed their things and left. He thought about what it meant that Wren had not. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Tomorrow was going to require what tomorrow was going to require. He had learned that at least over the years. Part 3, What Remains. The waiting room outside Courtroom 4 of the Fairfax County General District Court was not a dramatic space. It had the specific quality of all rooms designed primarily for waiting hard chairs, a water dispenser in the corner with a paper cup dispenser beside it, windows set too high to see through from a seated position. The overhead light was fluorescent and slightly too bright, the kind of light that makes everyone look as though they have not slept enough, which in this case was accurate. Wren Calloway sat in one of the hard chairs with her hands in her lap and her back straight and her eyes forward. She was wearing the pale blue sweater. This was not an accident. She had stood in front of her closet that morning for longer than she usually stood anywhere looking at it. The gray sweater was there too. She had reached for the gray one first, which was what she always reached for when she needed to disappear a little. Then she had stopped. She had taken down the blue one. Her mother had not said anything when she came downstairs. Carol Calloway had looked at the sweater for exactly the length of time it took to understand what it meant, and then she had handed Wren a piece of toast and a travel mug of coffee and said they needed to leave in 10 minutes. Decker was already in the waiting room when they arrived. He was sitting in a chair near the window with a paper cup of water he was not drinking, and he stood when he saw them come through the door. He nodded at Carol. He looked at Wren. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded as if this were a complete and satisfactory answer, because it was. They sat together in the too bright light. Carol had brought a paperback from her bag and was holding it at the angle of reading, which was not quite the same thing as reading. Decker held his paper cup. Wren sat with her hands in her lap. She had not brought her sketchbook. She had considered it and decided against it. Today required her hands to be empty and her eyes open and her attention entirely present. There would be time for the sketchbook afterward. Through the high windows, she could see the color of the sky, the particular pale gray of a November morning in Northern Virginia, the kind of sky that holds its light at a distance rather than giving it freely. She looked at it for a while and thought about nothing specific and let the morning be what it was. At 8:55, a court clerk appeared at the door and told them it was time. The courtroom was smaller than the ones on television. Wooden benches, a raised bench at the front where the judge would sit, 2 tables facing it. A witness stand to the left plane with a chair and a microphone and a glass of water. She sat in the gallery with her mother. Decker sat 1 row behind them. The county's attorney was a woman named Patricia Morris, mid-40s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the particular economy of movement that comes from doing something a long time and trusting it. She had met with Wren twice in the preceding weeks to go through her testimony and had said at the end of their second meeting, "Just say what happened, in your own words at your own pace. That's all you have to do." The defense attorney was a man named Richard Callister from a firm in McLean who moved through the courtroom with the practiced ease of someone who has won enough of these proceedings to stop finding them interesting. He represented Declan. Frank Pruitt had his own attorney seated separately in the gallery because Frank Pruitt's situation had by now become something adjacent to the main proceeding, but not contained within it. He sat in the 3rd row with his hands folded in his lap and his face arranged in the expression he had walked into every room with for 30 years. Composed, weighted. The expression of a man who has always known how rooms work and has never had reason to doubt that they will continue working in his favor. Declan Pruitt sat at the defense table. He was wearing a collared shirt, which was unusual enough that Wren spent a moment simply looking at it. He had his father's composed quality, but not yet his father's command of it. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his jaw tight and his eyes moving around the room in a way that suggested he was recalculating. The judge entered, everyone stood, then sat. The footage was entered into evidence first. Patricia Morris played all 4 clips on a monitor positioned where the judge and both tables could see it. She narrated each one briefly, noting dates, locations, and the names of the students identified. She used language that was plain and sequential, which was its own form of power. She said what had happened in order without decoration and let the footage do the rest. Callister objected to the inclusion of the 3 earlier clips on relevance grounds. The judge overruled him in a sentence without elaboration. The audio recording came in next. Carol Calloway had submitted it formally to the detective who had submitted it through proper channels, where it had done the work that Carol had known it would do when she pressed record in a principal's office on a Monday morning. The recording was played through speakers in the courtroom. Hargrove's voice and Frank Pruitt's attorney's voice, and the phrase managed this without it needing to go further, landing in the clean air of a courtroom the way such phrases always land when they travel from a closed office into an open room badly. Declan's hands on the table did not move. Frank Pruitt in the gallery looked at his attorney. His attorney touched his arm once and then was still. Then Wren was called to testify. She stood up from the bench. She was aware of her body in a way she was not usually aware of it, the pale blue sweater, the way her shoulders felt inside it, the specific weight of her feet against the floor as she walked toward the witness stand. She sat down. The microphone was in front of her. The glass of water was to her left. She looked at the room. It was smaller than television. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and an expression that communicated nothing in particular, which Wren thought was probably the correct expression for a judge to have at this stage. Patricia Morse was at her table. Callister was at his with a yellow legal pad and a pen he was holding, but not writing with. Declan was 6 feet to her left. She did not look at him. Patricia Morse walked her through it. The cafeteria, the date, what she had been doing, what happened, the sequence of events in order in her own words. Wren answered each question directly and completely and moved to the next one. She did not embellish. She did not minimize. She found that once she had started speaking, the words came with less effort than she had expected, as if the act of having given the statement once in the principal's office had established a path that she could now walk again without needing to clear it first. When Patricia Morse finished, she sat down. Callister stood. He was measured rather than aggressive, having calculated that aggression would not serve him here in front of this judge with this particular witness. He asked about the social dynamic at Westbrook High, framing it with the patient neutrality of someone establishing context. He asked whether she had interacted with Declan Pruitt before this incident. She said minimally. He asked whether it was possible the contact had been accidental, part of the general physical crowding of a busy cafeteria. She said no. He asked how she could be certain of intent from a single moment of contact. She said, "The footage shows his path across the cafeteria. He walked directly to where I was sitting. There was no crowding where he was standing." He asked why, if she felt the contact was inappropriate, she had not reported it immediately. She looked at him for a moment, then at the table, then back at him. "Because I was 17 years old," she said, "and I had spent 3 years in that school learning that certain people were not the kind of people you reported." She paused. "And because every instinct I had told me that if I did, the story would become about me and not about what he did." She paused. "I was right about that part." Callister moved on. He asked about the social media activity following the suspension, whether she could confirm its origin. She said she could not confirm the origin directly. He noted this for the record. Then he came to the question she had known was coming because Patricia Morse had told her it was coming and had told her she had the right to take her time with it. "Isn't it true?" Callister said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that is its own form of pressure. "That at the time of the alleged incident you said nothing. You did not call out. You did not report to a teacher present in the room. You simply left." The courtroom was quiet. Wren looked at him. She thought about Ms. Tanner's phone going back up. She thought about the cold water over her wrists. She thought about a red maple tree holding its color against a gray October sky. She said, "I was 17. I was quiet." That's what he counted on. She said it at an even pace without rushing it, which gave each word its full weight. She had not planned those exact words. They had simply arrived the way words sometimes arrive when you stop trying to find them and let them find you. The room held its silence for a moment after she spoke. Then the judge said, "You may step down." She walked back to her seat. She sat next to her mother. Carol placed her hand on top of Wren's hand once briefly and then removed it. It was enough. Patricia Morse stood and said that the prosecution had one more witness that had not been on the original list and formally requested permission to call him given the material relevance of his testimony to the pattern of conduct being established. Callister objected. The judge considered all for a moment and said she would allow it. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Owen Briggs walked in. He was wearing a button-down shirt that looked like something he had borrowed from an older version of himself, and he walked toward the front of the room with the deliberate stride of someone who has made a decision and is walking toward it before he can unmake it. He did not look at Declan's table. He looked at the witness stand, and he walked to it, and he sat down. Wren felt something shift in the room. She did not look at Declan directly, but she caught the motion of his hands on the table, a small contraction, the fingers pulling slightly inward. The first involuntary movement she had seen from him all morning. Patricia Morse asked Owen to state his name and his relationship to the defendant. He did. She asked him to describe in his own words the nature of his association with Declan Pruitt beginning in sophomore year. He did. He described it plainly in the same way Wren had described her own account in sequence, without embellishment, without the softening language that might have made it easier to hear. He described the photographs from the lake house weekend. He described the first mention of them in the locker room in October of that year, the way it had been done quietly, almost casually, and the way its meaning had been entirely clear nonetheless. He described 2 years of being present wherever Declan was present, laughing when Declan laughed, being there before things happened that he had learned not to ask about in advance. He described the cafeteria on October 15th. He said he had known from the way Declan had looked at him across the table what was about to happen. He said he had looked down. White Patricia Morse asked. He thought about this for a moment. He looked at his hands. Because looking down was the only option I'd left myself, he said. I'd been looking down for 2 years. I'd practiced it. Callister's cross-examination was brief. He attempted to establish Owen as an unreliable witness with a personal motive, noting that Owen's own potential exposure in the matter of the photographs gave him reason to construct a narrative that positioned him as a victim rather than a participant. Owen listened to this and then said evenly that he was not claiming he had done nothing wrong. He was claiming that what he had done wrong had been done under coercion and that these were different things and that he understood the difference. Callister had no further questions. Owen stepped down. As he passed the defense table, Declan looked at him with an expression that carried the specific quality of someone watching a door close on something they cannot get back. Owen did not look at Declan. Not once during his entire testimony had he looked at him. Wren had watched for it. There was a recess at 11:15. People stood and stretched. Wren went to the water dispenser in the waiting room and filled a paper cup and stood by the high windows, looking at the strip of pale November sky visible through them. Decker stood nearby, not speaking, which was the right thing. She heard the door behind her open and turned. Ms. Linda Tanner walked into the waiting room with a man she did not know, a younger man in a suit carrying a leather briefcase. They crossed to the far side of the room and Ms. Tanner remained standing. She was looking at the floor with the expression of someone in the final moments before something they cannot take back. She looked up and saw Wren. They looked at each other across the waiting room. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the looking did not already say, and they both seemed to understand this. Miss Tanner nodded once, a small motion that carried the specific weight of someone acknowledging a debt they intend to pay. Wren looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded back. The clerk appeared at the door and announced that the court was resuming. When they were all back in their seats, Ms. Linda Tanner's attorney stood and addressed the judge. He stated that his client wished to offer testimony and evidence material to the proceedings. He acknowledged that she had not been subpoenaed and that her appearance was voluntary, and he asked the court's permission for her to testify. Callister objected immediately. The objection was detailed and cited procedural points in rapid succession. The judge looked at the clock. She looked at Ms. at the defense table. She looked at Miss Tanner's attorney. She said, "I'll hear her." Linda Tanner sat in the witness stand with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the judge rather than the room. She said that on October 15th, she had been standing approximately 10 feet from the southeast corner of the cafeteria at 12:23. She said she had looked up from her phone when she heard the sound. She said she had registered what she was seeing. She said she had looked back down. She said it the way you say a true thing that costs you. Then she said that she wanted to address the court about why she had not intervened, and with the judge's permission, she would like to submit a collection of emails as evidence. Her attorney placed a folder on the clerk's desk. Callister's objection was immediate. The judge looked at the folder. She looked at Callister. She said she would review the material and determine admissibility. While the judge examined the folder, the courtroom held an unusual quality of silence. The kind that comes when everyone in the room understands that what is happening is material without yet knowing what it will produce. The judge looked up from the folder. She admitted the emails into evidence. Patricia Morse was given time to review them. She read them with the focused attention of someone reading a document once and needing to understand its full scope before speaking. Then she walked Miss Tanner through them. The emails covered a period beginning in October of 2017 and running through the following spring. They were between Linda Tanner and Frank Pruitt. They began with the matter of the complaint filed against Ms. Tanner in 2017, a complaint that had carried the realistic potential to end her career at Westbrook High. Frank Pruitt's emails from that period were carefully worded, the language of a man who understood that written words persist. but they established clearly through the sequence of what was said and when that he had intervened on her behalf in a way that went beyond the scope of his formal role on the school board. That what he had done had been a favor in the specific sense that creates obligation. The later emails were shorter. Some were a single line. Several referenced the Pruitt family by name in ways that were considered individually merely cordial and considered as a pattern something else entirely. Patricia Morse asked Ms. Tanner to characterize her understanding of the relationship described in the emails. Linda Tanner looked at the judge. "I owed him," she said. "That was the whole thing. I owed him, and I had been paying it, and I didn't call it by its name because if I called it by its name, I would have had to act differently, and I wasn't ready to act differently until I was." A pause. "I am now," she said. Frank Pruitt's attorney was on his feet requesting a sidebar. The judge granted it. The attorneys gathered at the bench, and the conversation lasted 4 minutes. When they returned to their positions, the judge addressed the room. She stated that given the content of the submitted evidence and its implications regarding the conduct of a board member, she was directing that a copy of the materials be forwarded to the county district attorney's office for separate review. She noted that this did not constitute a finding at this time, but that the referral was appropriate given the evidence before the court. Frank Pruitt stood up from his bench in the gallery. His attorney touched his arm. He sat back down. His face, for the first time since Wren had seen him in the main office of Westbrook High on a morning that felt like a long time ago, was no longer arranged. The composure was still there in the structure of it, in the set of the jaw and the line of the shoulders, the physical habit of 30 years. But behind it, something had shifted. Something that had always been in control of the room had stopped being in control of the room, and the face had not yet found a new expression to replace the one it had always worn. He would find one. Men like Frank Pruitt always found one. But he had not found it yet, and Wren looked at him for exactly as long as it took her to understand what she was seeing, and then she looked away. She did not need it. She had already gotten what she came for. The judge delivered her findings at 2:40 in the afternoon. She had reviewed the footage and the testimony and the submissions with the methodical attention of someone who has learned over years on the bench to separate what a case feels like from what the evidence establishes, and to make her determination from the latter without losing sight of the former. She found Declan Pruitt guilty on the count of harassment and the count of assault. She outlined the considerations that had informed her determination, the documented pattern across multiple incidents, the deliberate nature of the approach as established by the footage, the testimony of multiple witnesses, and the specific vulnerability of the targeted individuals, students who had no prior history of conflict with the defendant and who had not sought the interaction. She set sentencing for the following month and noted that she would be recommending evaluation and counseling as a component of whatever sentence she determined. She stayed any extracurricular participation effective immediately, which meant the football team effective immediately, which Wren noted without particular satisfaction. The team would find a way forward. Teams always did. Then the judge said something that Wren had not expected. She noted for the record that the matter of the internal reports, a detail that had surfaced in the discovery process from files Decker had submitted, would be forwarded to the school district's oversight body alongside the referral to the district attorney's office. She read into the record that 2 formal internal reports had been filed by the school's security officer, Kenneth Decker, during the previous academic year, both concerning the conduct of Declan Pruitt, and that both had been received by Principal Hargrove and closed without investigation. Hargrove had known. Not everything, not the whole pattern as Decker had assembled it, but enough. Enough to have acted. He had received the reports, signed for them, filed them, and moved on in the way that institutions move on from things that are inconvenient to examine. The discovery of those closed reports had not been the center of this proceeding. They were a detail within a larger evidentiary picture. But they were in the record now, and they meant what they meant. Wren sat very still and listened to this and let it settle in the way that true things settle when you hear them stated plainly in a room full of people. She had known in some approximate way that this was the shape of it, that the building had not simply failed to notice, that it had noticed and chosen a response, and the response had been to look at the reports and put them somewhere and return to the day. She thought about the 3 girls who had packed their things. She thought about the reports sitting in a closed file while those girls made their decisions to leave. She let herself think about it fully, and then she let it go because there was nothing to do with it in this room at this moment. And she had learned over the past several weeks that the things you cannot act on right now are best set down gently rather than carried. The judge concluded. The room began the careful process of ending. 2 days later, Wren learned through her mother that Hargrove had submitted his resignation to the school board. The board had accepted it. An interim principal would take over effective the following week pending a full administrative review. The school district had also engaged an independent firm to conduct what the official statement called a comprehensive review of reporting and response protocols related to student conduct. She read the statement on her phone in her room, sitting on her bed. She put the phone down and looked at the maple tree through her window. It was bare now, all the red gone, the branches clean and gray against the sky. She picked up her sketchbook. She drew the tree. There is a specific kind of return that is not a return to the same thing. It is more accurate to call it an arrival. You arrive somewhere that resembles the place you left because it is the same building, the same chairs, the same ceiling tiles. But you have changed the shape of your relationship to it, and so the place, though unchanged, is different. You are occupying it differently. You are in it, but you are no longer inside it in the same way. Wren walked into Westbrook High on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the hearing. She walked to her locker. She worked the combination which her hands knew without her having to think about it. She put her bag in, took her first period things out, closed the locker. She walked to the cafeteria. Not for any dramatic reason. She had lunch at the same time she always had lunch, and the cafeteria was where lunch happened. She got her tray. She chose a table in the middle section. She set her tray down. She opened her sketchbook to a clean page. She ate her sandwich, which was peanut butter on wheat, because some things you keep because you want to keep them, and not because anything has compelled you to change them. People noticed her in the way that people notice a thing that exists in a new position. There was the half-second recalibration she had come to recognize as attention. She let it complete, and then it moved on, and the room went back to being what it was, which was a cafeteria at lunch on a Monday. She drew the room from this new angle. She had drawn it from the corner for 2.5 years with the full theater of it spread before her. Drawing it from the middle was different. The geometry changed. The things that had been background from the corner were foreground from here. The things that had been foreground were now context. She had to look at it again, as if for the first time, which meant she had to look at it hard. She was working on the angle of the serving counter when the quality of the noise at the cafeteria entrance shifted. She had trained herself to notice that specific shift. She did not look up immediately. She held her pencil still and listened. The noise was the particular kind that comes when someone is standing in the entrance of a crowded room and has not yet moved into it. The sound of a person trying to determine whether the room has a place for them. She had been that sound herself every day for 2.5 years in a different corner of the same room. She looked up. A girl she did not know, small with a face that was trying not to show how much it needed something. A lunch tray held in both hands like a small shield. The expression of someone who has entered a room and found it full of the specific kind of full that feels from the outside like a thing that cannot be entered. The girl was a freshman by the look of her. She was looking at the tables the way you look at a map of a city you have never been to, trying to find the logic, the pattern, the place that might be yours. She looked at Wren's table. Wren did not wave her over. She did not call out or smile or make any of the signals that can be misread or retracted. She looked at the girl for a moment, and then she reached down and pushed the chair beside her, the empty one, slightly out from the table. Just that, the chair moved a few inches outward. The girl stood in the entrance for another second. Then she crossed the cafeteria. She sat down in the pushed-out chair. She set her tray on the table. She looked straight ahead for a moment and then began eating, which is what you do when someone has given you a place and you do not want to make it into something it isn't just yet. Her name, Wren would learn the following week, was Maisie. She was a freshman who had transferred in from a school in Maryland in September and had been eating lunch in the bathroom for the first 6 weeks before she had run out of reasons to keep doing it. She did not offer this information in any formal way. It came out in pieces over successive Tuesdays and Thursdays, in the manner of things that are said when two people have been sitting together long enough that the silence between them becomes comfortable enough to put words into. Wren looked back at her sketchbook. She drew the serving counter. She drew the ceiling tiles. She drew the particular way the November light came in through the cafeteria windows at noon and fell across the middle tables, which she had never seen from this angle before, and which was different enough from what she had expected that she had to stop and look at it carefully for a minute before she tried to put it on the page. She drew it from where she was, right where she was. Kenneth Decker's last day at Westbrook High School was on a Friday in early December. He had accepted a position with the county school district's newly formed Office of Student Safety, a body that had been created in part as a direct response to the administrative review that followed the Westbrook proceedings. His title was Student Safety Liaison. He had looked at the title for a while before concluding that what mattered was not what they called it, but what the what actually required him to do. What it required him to do was go into schools and look at things carefully and say what he found. He had been doing that for 11 years in one building. The county had 42 schools. He cleared his desk on a Friday afternoon after the students had left. The notepad with the timestamps. A coffee mug. A photograph of Clara taken the summer she was 14 at a lake, laughing at something just outside the frame. A small succulent he had been keeping alive on the windowsill for 4 years, which had no business surviving in a room with that little natural light, but had done so anyway, which he had always found quietly admirable. He took the items off the wall, the safety protocols sheet in its laminate sleeve, the map of the building showing camera positions that he had updated by hand 3 times as cameras were added or moved. He took down a card from last year's senior class that 18 students had signed. Most of them kids he had intervened for in small ways that they remembered and he had largely forgotten. He took down the framed drawing last. He held it for a moment. It was a pencil drawing on a piece of composition paper 8.5 by 11 with the specific quality of work produced by someone who is genuinely accomplished at the thing and is not performing accomplishment, but simply doing it. It showed a man sitting at a desk with a monitor array behind him, looking at something off to the right of the frame. The man's posture was the posture of someone accustomed to watching. His face was precise and unguarded in the way that very good portraits are unguarded. The subject caught being themselves rather than performing being themselves. Wren had brought it to him the week after the hearing. She had knocked on the open door of his office and held it out without preamble. He had looked at it for a moment and then at her, and she had said simply that she had wanted him to have it. He had said thank you, and she had nodded and gone back to class. In the lower right corner, in small, neat handwriting, she had written, "To the one who didn't look away." He put the drawing in the box carefully face up. He looked around the small room. The monitor array was still on, showing the live feeds from all 14 cameras. The cafeteria empty in the late afternoon. The hallways quiet. The parking lot with its orange sodium light coming on against the early December dark. Camera 4 into the southeast corner, holding its angle on the corner table. The light above it had been fixed last week, a maintenance request submitted by the interim principal on his second day, one of the first things he had done. The corner was fully lit now, evenly, the same as every other part of the room. It looked different. Wren's table was occupied by a group of sophomores who had claimed it sometime in November, which meant that whatever informal hold 2.5 years of daily presence had established had been absorbed and replaced in the way of all informal ownership. Good. It should be used. Decker turned off the monitor array. He picked up the box. He walked out of the office and down the hall and out through the main entrance, past the brass plaque by the gym with Frank Pruitt's name on it. The plaque was still there for now. There was paperwork involved in removing such things, and it moved at the pace of institutions, which was a pace Decker had made his peace with years ago. It would come down. He knew it would. He did not need to see it happen to know that it would. He put the box in the trunk of his car. He closed the trunk. He got in the driver's seat. He sat for a moment in the parking lot. The school building was lit from inside, in the way institutional buildings are lit in the early evening, every window a specific shade of yellow. He had looked at this building from this parking lot for 11 years. He looked at it now for the last time and let himself do that fully, without hurrying it. He thought about 3 girls whose names he knew but who were not here. He thought about the notepad in the box behind him. He thought about a recording of 4 minutes and 32 seconds. He thought about a young man in a button-down shirt walking to a witness stand without looking at the person who had controlled him for 2 years. He thought about 2 reports, filed, received, closed, sitting in a drawer while a school ran its ordinary days around them. He thought about a girl in a pale blue sweater who had walked out of a cafeteria without running and then walked back in the next day and sat in the same corner and kept drawing. He started the car. Wren Calloway sat at the middle table on a Tuesday in the second week of December. Maisie was beside her reading something on her phone and eating a cup of yogurt with a plastic spoon and doing neither fully the way people do when both tasks are comfortable enough to do without full attention. Wren was working on a drawing of Maisie's profile, the way she looked when she was eating, and thinking at the same time, which was a specific expression Wren had been studying for 2 weeks and was not completely satisfied she had gotten right. The jaw, the set of the eyes, the particular quality of a 15-year-old girl's face when it has stopped performing anything and is just existing, which is the best thing a face can do and the hardest thing to capture. The cafeteria noise moved around them, trays and chairs and 100 separate conversations at various volumes. Someone dropped something near the drink station. The usual cheer went up and subsided. The corner table was occupied by sophomores as it had been since November. Wren looked at it occasionally, not with any feeling of loss, but with the specific attention she gave to anything that was different from how it had been. She had drawn that corner many times from the inside of it. She had never drawn it from here. She turned to a fresh page. She drew the corner table. From where she was sitting, the distance of it, the proportion within the larger room, the angle of the two walls meeting behind it. She drew it as accurately as she could, getting the geometry right the way space looks when you have moved to a different position within it and have to relearn what you thought you knew. She drew it empty. Just the table. Just the chairs. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the sandwich on the floor and the pencil skipping across the page and the cold water over her wrists and the gray sweater she had reached for that November morning and the blue one she had chosen instead. She thought about a parking lot conversation in October, a man's voice saying, "You didn't do anything wrong," with the specific weight of someone who meant it. She thought about a recording made on a phone in a jacket pocket. She thought about Owen Briggs walking toward a witness stand without looking back. She thought about Maisie eating lunch in a bathroom for 6 weeks because she had not found a door that was open. She thought about the ones who hadn't come back, the 3 girls. She did not know their names. She had not asked for them because asking would have felt like reaching into something that was not hers to reach into. But she knew they had existed. She knew the shape of what they had carried. She knew the particular cost of being the kind of person a room decides not to protect. In the corner of the drawing, small enough to almost miss, she drew 3 empty chairs. She did not draw them with sadness or with any particular weight. She drew them the way you draw a true thing, carefully, honestly, without trying to make it into something other than what it was. 3 chairs. 3 people who had been here and were not here anymore, a fact recorded in pencil by someone who had been taught to look. She looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she turned to a new page and went back to work on Maisie's jaw. The angle was still not quite right. She had been working on it for 2 weeks, and she was going to keep working on it until she got it right, because that was what you did with things worth getting right. You kept at them. You stayed in the room. You did not give them the table. Outside the cafeteria windows, December had settled over the school grounds with the flat, clean certainty of a season that knows what it is. The trees at the edge of the parking lot were bare. The light that came through the windows at noon was low and direct, the shortest daylight falling across the middle tables where Wren sat and reached the floor at an angle she had been tracking for weeks in the small, careful marks she made in her notebook, without meaning to a record of the year, moving through a room she now occupied from the center. Her pencil moved. Maisie turned a page on her phone, ate a spoonful of yogurt, looked sideways at the sketchbook, the way she sometimes did when she thought Wren wasn't watching, which Wren always was. The room around them was full and ordinary and loud with the noise of several hundred people eating lunch in an institution in December in Northern Virginia, in a year that had not turned out to be ordinary in the ways any of them had expected. Wren's pencil kept moving. She was going to get the jaw right. She had the time. 3 girls transferred out of Westbrook High before Wren Calloway sat down at that corner table. Nobody ever asked them to come back.